So the American birth rate is now more than triple that of China. It's been going for so long that they now have more people aged over 53 than under. And within the next few years, they simply won't have a consumption base, a workforce, a tax base, or consumers at all.
Yeah, one of the things, there's a lot of catastrophizing trying to justify investments or bringing onshoring U.S. manufacturing that we couldn't survive in a shooting war with China. But I think I read somewhere that China's out of business if you manage to cut off their energy supply, that they're actually quite vulnerable to any sort of external conflict. Your thoughts?
I would argue that if there's any meaningful conflict in China, we don't simply have a break of the Chinese military, which, by the way, doesn't have range. So for them to beat us in a shooting war, we have to go to them. If we want to destroy them, we just need a few destroyers in the Indian Ocean basin to interfere with shipping, and that's it. It's over. We're actually looking at the disassociation of China as a unified industrialized nation state within the decade. And before Trump came in, I would have said that would have probably been about 8 years. If we take a much more aggressive position on trade, it's going to be a lot less. That doesn't mean we won't feel it. You don't remove the world's largest industrial base from the math and not feel it. But for us, it's something we can grow through. For them, we are literally looking at the end of the Han ethnicity this century.
Just to steelman this, isn't potentially the tariffs in America sort of tearing up the post-war alliances, and a lot of nations, I think, no longer looking at us as a reliable partner? Do you think there's an opportunity for China in terms of new trade agreements? I just saw for the first time that more people globally see China as a force of good than the U.S. Isn't this potentially an opportunity for China for new markets?
As a rule, I ignore what people say and look at what they do. This isn't the first time that in American politics have made us less popular around the world. And I'm not willing to suggest that there aren't some short-term opportunities here. But the bottom line is that China doesn't have enough people under age 50 to consume. And so the product has to go somewhere. It just gets dumped in other markets. And as we have seen with the EV issue in 2024, as soon as the United States put on tariffs to block EVs from swarming into the American markets, everyone else did some version of the same if they had any sort of auto industry. So what we're seeing right now is the first stages of that. The Chinese are losing access to the American market. They're trying to dump everything everywhere else. And we're now starting to see those secondary waves of tariffs forming. So it's a nice thought, but I wouldn't put too much stock in it in the long term.
They must be playing with the ultimate poker face, though, because my sense is they basically told Trump to pound sand. And if they were as vulnerable as your data suggests, don't you think they'd be more amenable to some sort of big, beautiful deal?
Well, a couple thoughts to that. Number one, this always had a limited runway. And so any deal that they were able to strike, say, today, they'd still collapse within the decade. So is there a deal that would allow them to persist throughout that time without losing their sense of self? I'm not sure that's true anymore. It might have been 10 years ago, but not now. Second, it's unclear to me how much Xi is actually aware. He has so purged the system, most notably the bureaucracy, that the bureaucracy no longer even collects data that they think might result in numbers that Xi doesn't want to hear. So they just don't collect it at all. So the idea that Xi has a deep understanding of the reality of the world or even his own country now, that's flawed. It's just not true.
The new book by, I think it's Patrick McGee, talking about Apple essentially upskilling China and as a result, creating a pretty robust advanced manufacturing capability in China. And Tesla, you could argue, doing maybe the same thing, that some of that is leaked to BYD. It strikes me that they have built this incredible supply chain. You don't think that pulls them out? You don't think that's their saving grace?
No, I mean, that certainly helps. But we're not at a point where tech transfer would help here. I mean, if you don't have workers, you don't have workers. It really is that simple. In the case of Tesla, Tesla made the same mistake that most manufacturers in the United States made, is they thought they could set up a system where their intellectual property rights would be protected. And then the competitors, BYD, for example, set up a plant across the street and hired exactly the same people. So they'd work one shift at Tesla, copy everything they could, work one shift at BYD, install it all over there. We've seen this story over and over and over again in pretty much every manufacturing sector. Uh, Apple, a little different. Apple, it's an assembly story. Most of the parts that matter for Apple are made somewhere else, and everything comes together in China. It's just like the semiconductor sector writ large has 30,000 pieces. They come together at Taiwan. And now Apple has to basically figure out a new model for bringing everything together. And it's not clear they can achieve the same scale anywhere else in the world. So we will probably be taking a few-year break from having iPhones.
This was Patrick's point, that the notion that an iPhone domestically manufactured in the U.S. would cost $3,500. He said it might as well cost $1 million, that we're just literally not capable of it. $1 million or 1,000 individual.
The $3,500 assumes you've already built the infrastructure.
Right.
We haven't.
And his point was it would be easier to recreate the Manhattan Project than try to figure out a way to produce 1 million iPhones a day.
Manhattan Project was easy. That was just a few dozen dudes basically running a few gamma ray experiments.
That doesn't make for a good film.
Yeah, it's like the modern, I mean, this little guy, I mean, there's 1,800 pieces in this, and each of those pieces has their own supply chain. One of the things that we forget when we talk about electronics is it's not just like 8 pieces. It's 800 plus pieces, each of which have their own components. Computing today, high-end electronics today requires the entire planet. And people focus on the United States and China and Taiwan. It's not those are unimportant partners. But for example, there's a single company in California and another one in Germany that make very, very small pieces for the manufacturing process that don't even go into the chips. But without them, none of it happens. And there's 30,000 failure points like that.
So you would not be long Apple stock right now. You said a couple years without iPhone.
No. I mean, every time the new phone comes out, I buy a backup because I'm preparing for the day that this just stops. But no, it's like there's no way that Apple comes out of this without a few years of no product.
So you're obviously bearish on China. Who are you bullish on?
If you were willing to dial the clock back to October, I would have been bullish on the United States on all cylinders. We've got the best demography, we've got the best infrastructure, we have the best educational system, we're more than self-sufficient in energy and food. We had some gaps, all of them related to the manufacturing sector, and really that was it. One of the problems that I've got with the Trump administration right now is it's basically cut off our ability to access the precursor stuff that we need in order to build out our industrial plant. So Trump likes to focus on steel and aluminum, not that those aren't important, but it's more than that. It's turning raw chemicals into processed chemicals that can then be built into the manufacturing system. It's about a copper smelter. There's 1,000 things that happen in the processing world that the United States doesn't have that we need first, if then we're going to build out the industrial plant. And Trump has basically made that impossible in the midterm.
So does this all present an opportunity for Europe?
In the short term again, but their demographics, while not as terminal as the Chinese, are still pretty bad. The Chinese are aging faster than anybody else. And by the end of this decade, they will have the oldest average age of any country in the world, including Japan. But the Germans and the Italians and the Dutch are not all that far behind. So we are in the final years of them having a value-added manufacturing system as well.
Can a lot of these problems be solved with immigration, though, in terms of I love that you focus on demographics, but can't some of this work, labor force and aging population, be solved with immigration policies?
Based on whose numbers you're using and how you define Hispanic, because that's a problem here in this country, somewhere between 1/3 and 1/2 of the American birth rate is either immigrants or children of immigrants. And so that's a non-trivial factor. The problem's timing. So if you can incorporate immigration into your political culture, and so have a dribble coming in year in, year out, so that those people can be assimilated, then yes, immigration absolutely can be part of your solution. But if you have waited until everyone's old and then open the doors, then you've got a very different situation. So take the German example right now. There's roughly 82 million Germans, but the average age is now over 50. So for them to just hold where they are, they need to bring in 2 million people under age 25 every year for the next 20 years just to hold the line. And that means you've brought in 50 million people, and all of a sudden the Germans are no longer the majority in their own country.